right in the center, because like we have so many parents standing.
Very good.
Okay, please be seated. We're going to start. So it's a great honor and pleasure to introduce a real scholar, a real academic leader, and a friend, Al Roth. Al Roth is a leader, in fact, at least in two branches of economics. One is experimental economics, and the other is market design. And it's quite rare for a field, especially for a flourishing field, and an important field like market design to be, it's very rare for a field to be associated with a single person, and almost associated with a single person. And market design, when people mention market design, almost the only the only person that come up in everybody's mind is Al Roth. Al Roth is the promoter, to some extent the initiator, and certainly the promoter of this amazing field. This is one of the fields in economics which has the most real-life application. It's beyond the fact that it's a field in which a very smart theory papers are written. It is also a very practical field. It's a field. It's the practice of economics. It's a practice of game theory. And Al Roth sometimes describes himself as an economic engineer, right? As the one who brings the economic to design the market. Okay, the applications of market design are primarily in the area of matching, starting with matching students to young doctors into hospitals, through students or kids into high schools or at Boston. And eventually it was Al Roth initiated and developed a very important platform for kidney exchange. This is a platform in which kidney patients and donors of kidneys can come together and exchange donation, okay? Exchange donation to improve biofitness of the patients. This is really an application that boils down to saving life. And I'm sure Al will mention it, and I want to welcome Al Roth to give his talk. Thank you.
Huh, that didn't work. Let me try again. No. Here we go. Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to be here on the celebration of the Rationality Center. Pardon me? Control A? Let's Control L. There you go. Okay. So I'm happy to be here. Thinking about rationality in practical context is hard. You know, Eddie already talked to us a bit about this, because of course you have to think about it together with irrationality. And so I want to tell you a little bit of that in terms of the experience we've had with market design. And as Al mentioned, my colleagues and I have been privileged to get involved in various kinds of market design. I'm not going to tell you today about the things on the top of this slide about labor markets. I'm going to talk more about school choice systems and kidney exchange. But let me suggest to you that these are not as different as they might appear. Sometimes people look at these and they say, you know, labor markets are the kind of markets that economists normally study because people work for wages, and economists spend a lot of time thinking about how price serves to allocate things in the market, to decide who gets what. But school choice systems that we've been putting into place in a number of American cities, and certainly kidney exchange, these are things where price doesn't play a role. But let me suggest to you that they're all matching markets, because even the labor markets are markets where who gets what isn't decided entirely by price, right? My university doesn't admit students by raising the price of tuition until just enough freshmen remain. We like to keep the price low enough that lots of people would like to enroll, and then we choose among them. Similarly, when we hire assistant professors, we don't lower the wage until just enough people remain to teach our classes. We like to choose among them too. And the sign of a matching market, and most markets are matching markets. I propose to you that everything that isn't a pure commodity market is a matching market, is that together with price adjustments, you also see admissions and selection and various kinds of courtship processes. So matching is about all those things that you can't just choose what you want, you also have to be chosen. And in terms of market design, I'm going to tell you of some very specific markets, but some things to keep in mind are what should a marketplace do to work well. And basically, a marketplace should help the market be thick, should bring enough people together. They should want to come to the marketplace and not transact elsewhere. Once it's thick, you might have to deal with congestion. In the context of kidney exchange, I'll talk about particular kinds of congestion. And then it has to be safe to enter the marketplace, to transact, to reveal the information that you need to reveal. I think today I won't have time to talk about the fact that some kinds of transactions are repugnant. In kidney exchange, the question that always comes up when I speak to audiences of economists is, why don't we simply buy and sell kidneys? An excellent, difficult, profound question that has other kinds of connections too that I'm afraid I won't get to talk about today, but I'm happy to talk about it other times. So to telegraph what I'm going to do in the talk, I'm going to tell you at some length about school choice in Boston, and the way I'm going to talk about how rationality and irrationality are impacted by market design and impacted. When we came to analyze the old school choice mechanism in Boston, we found that it wasn't strategy proof. It wasn't safe. The school system asked parents to state their preferences for schools, and it turns out it wasn't safe to tell them your true preferences. If you were clever, you had to think hard about what they were going to do with those preferences. And that had two consequences. Many parents were clever, the rational parents, if you like. And so that led to information being missing from allocation because they couldn't tell. It wasn't safe to tell their true preferences. The other consequence, of course, is that many parents were not clever. They were asked to say their preferences. Even though it wasn't safe to do so, they did, and they came to harm. That's what it means, that it wasn't safe to state your true preferences. So I'm going to tell you about how we redesigned the Boston school choice system so that it became safe to state your true preferences, and how this has benefited both the rational and the irrational among the parents. When I get to kidney exchange, when I talk about, well, this is actually, if there's time, I'll tell you the story from the beginning. And this is a case in which the set of players have changed over time. When kidney exchange was brand new, the players were patients and their surgeons, and they had a certain strategy set. Now that kidney exchange is a going concern in the United States, the players are the hospitals, the directors of transplant centers, who have different strategy sets available to them. They don't just have to decide, like a patient or a surgeon, should this patient be in or out. They see sets of patients. And the hospitals, I must say, are very rational. They are relentless in their pursuit of self-interest, just the way we like to model them. And sometimes, of course, that can lead them into social dilemmas. That is, not everything is efficient when everyone is relentless in their pursuit of self-interest. When I talk about irrationality in kidney exchange, I hate to use the word irrationality here, but what I mean is behavior not captured in the standard economic models. And it turns out that partly because of the way the hospitals behave, non-directed donors and donors who are honorable in other ways, altruistic and honorable donors, have become very important in the way we deliver kidney exchange, in the way it's implemented, so that the design now depends on them in many ways. And so the fact is, they are, I don't want to call them irrational at all, but they are not selfish. They are interested in the welfare of others, and they are honorable. They keep their promises. And being able to rely that many will keep their promises has changed the way we design kidney exchange. So I want to tell you about that too. And so in general, though, so as I will tell you about both those things, designing marketplaces, designing good institutions helps both the rational users, because inefficiencies can result when they have to play strategically. And it also helps the unsophisticated avoid the costs of not being strategic. And when you do something like school choice, of course, there are going to be parent groups that are very into the school choice mechanism and how to help their children navigate it, and others who are not at all. And when you design a marketplace, you design for both of them. So let me tell you about the situation we found in Boston. The Boston, unlike some of the other school districts we've helped design choice systems, Boston already had a centralized school choice system in place. And their system was a very, very simple one. They asked parents to list the choice of schools, first choice, second choice, third choice. And then they took that information, and subject to a system of priorities, they tried to give as many people as possible their first choice. And when they had given as many people as possible their first choice, they looked at those remaining and they gave as many people as possible their second choice, and so forth. So that's simple and benign. And they had to break ties, because the schools can have capacity constraints, so that if the Linden kindergarten only has 20 seats in it and 40 or 150 people ask for those seats, they have to decide which 20 will get in. And they did it with a simple system of priorities. First priority was if you have an older child already going to the school, so there's a sibling priority. Second priority is if you're in the walk zone of the school, and the third priority is with a random number. So every child got a lottery number, and with children with otherwise equal priority were assigned randomly when they were trying to allocate first choices. So subject to the priority order, they would assign everyone who they could to their first choice. Of those remaining, everyone to their second choice, and so forth. And so this is not safe at all to tell the school system your true preferences, because if you fail to get your first choice, there's a good chance that your second choice will have been filled by people who listed it as their first choice. So even if you have high priority for your second choice, even if you live in the walk zone, even if your child has an older sibling who's already in your second choice school, so that you would have been at the very top of the priority list, if you list it as your second choice, you lose your priority because it's full of people who listed it with their first choice. And so parents played strategically, and the system looked very good. It looked like everyone was getting their first choice. Okay, pretty much with a small set of exceptions, when you looked at the Boston data, over 80% of people were getting their first choice. But of course, you all understand that if it's not safe to list what your true preferences are, and if it's really important to get your first choice, because if you don't get your first choice, your subsequent choices might be filled, then there's going to be an equilibrium at which everyone thinks very carefully about what to state as their first choice. And people understood that pretty well. Here, my favorite parents group was the West Zone parents group. For those of you who know Boston, they're in Jamaica Plain. They're like us. They're game theorists. They think about how to get their children through the system. And they distributed literature and chat groups on the internet. They distributed advice. So one thing they said quite perceptibly was, one school choice strategy is to find a school you like that is undersubscribed and put it as the top choice. That is, pick a school so that when you list it as your first choice, you'll get it. Or find a school that you like that is popular and take a chance, put it as your first choice, but in that case, find a school that's less popular for a safe second choice. If you're going to pick a hard-to-get first choice, you better put a school for your second choice that won't be filled by the time second choices are filled. Okay? Even Boston public schools sort of advised this in their literature. They said, for a better chance of your first choice school, consider choosing less popular schools. So they understood in a certain institutional way that the first choices weren't preferences, they were something else. And the West Zone parents, they devoted a lot of resources to figuring out what to do. I've just got 2 emails from to their chat group. Someone says, have you gotten any sense, they're asking for intelligence, have you gotten any sense if a lot of people are choosing Philbrick as a first choice? We really like the Philbrick. We love the kindergarten teacher. That's the kind of information they should be asking about, but are not in the walk zone. We're putting Manning first because we have priority there. We're in the walk zone and Philbrick second, but I'm getting very nervous that Philbrick has gotten so popular that it might only be a good #1 selection. Okay, so here's someone who understands that if the Philbrick is too popular, then putting it as second choice is a wasted choice. And in any event, they're thinking strategically. They're not thinking primarily about where's the good kindergarten teacher. Okay, here's a couple of days later. We're also having trouble deciding on a secure second choice. We're struggling between the Manning and the Haley for our first choice. We really love the Haley, but I'm afraid it's not a safe second choice anymore. Okay, so these guys are thinking hard the way we would think if we were stuck with that system. You can see how inefficiencies may result. People have imperfect information, they're thinking strategically. They're in different, these 2 emails are people in different districts. I mean, they're thinking of different schools, but it's a pretty big area, so I think they are mostly looking for information. Incidentally, this group had excellent intelligence of a certain sort that the Boston Public Schools didn't have for kindergarten entry. We work with 6th grade and 9th grade as well. But for kindergarten, Boston Public Schools doesn't know how many children will be applying with sibling priority because you don't see the rising kindergartners until they show up. But if you spend a lot of time in the playgrounds, you can find out who is going to kindergarten who has an older child already in the school. And so these guys would do a census of the kindergartners and say, of the 20 seats at the Linden, how many are going to be filled with sibling priority? And they would know that there are really only 13 seats at the Linden, and would start to make calculations of that sort. So they spent a lot of effort intelligently thinking how to manage the system. At the same time, there were parents who made mistakes, the ones I'll call irrational here. And to make it clear what a mistake is, I'll call a school over-demanded if the number of students who rank that school as their first choice is greater than the number of seats in the school. So a school is over-demanded if no one can ever get it except as a first choice. And nevertheless, 19% of the sample we looked at in 1 year in a high school set listed 2 over-demanded schools as their top 2 choices. Okay, and so they list 2 over-demanded schools. They might get their first choice, because some people will get an over-demanded school, but they will never get their second choice. So if they fail to get their first choice, they will also fail to get their second choice. And of these, 27% were unassigned. That is, not only didn't they get their second choice because it was filled with people who had asked for it as their first choice, but then they didn't get their third choice because it was filled with people who had either asked for it as their first or their second choice, and if they listed a fourth choice, they didn't get that because it was filled. So this is a costly mistake, and it's a mistake in the sense that when you look at the people who were unassigned, you find that many of them, if they hadn't listed the second choice, if they had just crossed it off and listed their third choice as their second choice, they would have gotten their third choice. So for whatever reason, either because they don't have adequate information about demand or because they don't understand how the system works, there are people who have suffered from putting down what may be their true preferences, but cause them to list a second choice that is over-demanded. Pardon me? If they're unassigned, they are sent to, they have to go to school, but they are sent to the nearest school that has empty places. So a school that has empty places for a reason. This is a very undesirable outcome, right? So these are big city districts. A big problem in the US and maybe in Israel is that not all of our schools are good, and they tend to be associated. The reason we have school choice is that people who grow up in poor and perhaps violent neighborhoods aren't condemned to go to poor and perhaps violent schools. But it doesn't mean that we've abolished poor schools. So to be sent to a school that still has empty places when everyone else has chosen is not a good outcome. Okay? Now, one effect of school choice, once we get adequate preference information, which I'll tell you about, once we make it safe to tell true preferences, is that starts to indicate which schools are liked and which aren't, and it helps to close schools and repair them and make them smaller. So there is an interaction between school choice and making schools better. But making schools better is a much slower, more expensive process than instituting school choice. The efficiencies from school choice come not from the zero-sum nature that some schools are good and some are bad, but that some have music programs and some have math programs. If you're going to allocate a scarce resource, if you have a limited number of good schools, you still want to use them efficiently. Okay, so the costs of having it not safe to state your true preferences are twofold. One is the sophisticated, the rational parents are gaming the system, which means a lot of information is missing from the system because you don't see the true preferences. And those who don't play strategically get hurt. If it's not safe to state your true preferences, some people will still state their true preferences. They're asked to state their preferences, they do, and they come to harm because it's not safe. And parents knew this too. I mean, when we finally had to have public hearings to propose a new system, and the kind of quotes we got indicated that at least some people knew very well, you know, I have to tell parents, this is someone talking about advice he gives to other parents, I have to say, don't make your first choice your first choice. And that this was a frustrating bureaucracy to deal with. You know, not only was it hard to deal with the system, but it made the city of Boston seem less trustworthy and easy to deal with. And that was a problem as well. So many of you in the audience know how a system like this is fixed. The old Boston algorithm that I described to you, it was an immediate acceptance algorithm. If you applied as your first choice to a school and they had space for you and you were high enough on the priority list, they accepted you. And when someone else applied to that school later as a second choice, your acceptance was already binding. They couldn't displace you even if they had higher priority. But in a deferred acceptance algorithm, the schools don't accept people immediately. They reject them immediately. Lots of people apply as their first choice. They keep them in order of priority up to capacity, and they reject the rest. But the ones they haven't rejected aren't accepted yet. Now, after some are rejected, they apply to their second choice. And now the school looks again at all the people who have applied to it so far, including the ones who were left over from last period and the new ones to come this period, and it orders them in terms of priority. So you don't lose your priority. If you apply as your second choice to a school in which you have sibling priority, you go right to the top of their list. And now they reject everyone who doesn't have high enough priority to make it. But this is without regard to when you applied. So that's what makes a deferred acceptance algorithm safe to reveal your true preferences. You no longer lose your priority if you apply to someplace second. They don't care when you apply, they just care what's your priority. And only when no one is rejected anymore, only when all the applications have been made for first choice, for second choice, for third choice, are acceptances issued. That's why it's called a deferred acceptance algorithm. This is basically the algorithm outlined by Gale and Shapley in 1962, but calling it a deferred acceptance algorithm gives an insight into what's going on. That's what's now used in Boston. It's used in a number of school systems where we've helped design things. It's not the only way to make school choice strategy-proof. And in New Orleans for next year, they're going to have a different kind of strategy-proof algorithm called top trading cycles, which I'll tell you about in a moment in a very different context. Okay, so thinking about Boston, what's happened since we changed to a strategy-proof application procedure? Yeah. In Boston, the schools are not strategic players at all. The Boston public schools, the administration sets the priorities. In New York City, the schools are strategic. So different cities are different. But today I spoke just, pardon me? They're absolutely. So cities are different from each other. There's no question about that. And municipal politics is interesting. Getting things implemented is not trivial. It was in Boston, there was a vote of the school committee, which is an elected committee. It was a very interesting process. Among the things we see, just one of the things we see is that people now have much longer preference lists than they used to. It hardly made sense to list more than 3 schools under the old procedure, because after you didn't get your third choice, every school that you could think of had been filled with people who had listed it either as their first or second or third choice. But now you can get very popular kindergartens as your fourth choice, and we see that. We see people living across the street in the walk zone of the Linden School, which has a very, very popular half-day kindergarten. But there are 3 really nice full-day kindergartens that would make sense if you live there. And now we sometimes see people who have the right to go to the Linden, they live across the street from it, applying for it as their 4th choice because they want first one of the full-day kindergartens that's also very nice. Some of them get those kindergartens, leaving space in the Linden for people who wanted the half-day kindergarten but didn't have the same priority. Some of them don't, but then they go into the Linden as their 4th choice. They all used to go into the Linden as their 1st choice.
You're not saying that the deferred acceptance algorithm is strategy proof, are you?
I am. I'm saying it's strategy proof for the families, and they are the only strategic players. Say again? Okay. When I say strategy proof, I'm speaking of a particular, I have in mind a particular strategy set. So the strategy, so Bob, to answer your question, the strategy set I have in mind is only the list of preferences. And this is the student proposing deferred acceptance algorithm, so it's a dominant strategy for them to list their true preferences. The schools are not strategic players. They have priorities set by the Department of Education, which is called Boston Public Schools. So they are not players. But that is different in New York, where the schools are strategic players. And of course there, someone once proved a theorem that says there are no stable procedures that are strategy proof for both sides. Yes? I can't hear you.
How does the school, how does the district determine if the student should be rejected in the first round?
They order they see how many applications they get. They order them in terms of priority. They accept down to their capacity and reject the rest. Provisionally. They don't, right, they reject all those above capacity and hold the rest to see whether they will eventually be accepted. Yeah, they're not yet rejected. Okay, let me switch gears and tell you about kidney exchange. And I'm going to try to take you through the whole story pretty quickly, because this is a story about a set of institutions that, as they started to get built, changed the game that they were a part of. That is, the players who were involved in this game changed as it happened. So I want to tell you about how we initially modeled it, how the game changed, and how we're modeling it now, and what are the consequences for how some of these policies are implemented. So let me give you a little quick background. Yesterday, when I checked, there were over 90,000 patients waiting for, on a waiting list administered sort of nationally for a deceased donor kidney, for a kidney from a dead person. That number goes up every time I look. So when I started talking about kidney exchange, that number was in the 40,000, so a decade ago. So I'm going to tell you a story of a war in which every battle I tell you about we're winning, but you shouldn't misunderstand. We're losing the war. So how come we're losing the war? Well, every year more patients are added to the list than are withdrawn from it. And so in 2010, there were only 10,000 transplants of kidneys from dead people. But you know, 34,000 patients were added to the list. There are other ways to be removed from the list. You can die while on the list, right? So kidney disease is a fatal disease, but it can be held at bay by kidney dialysis, but dialysis is less and less useful as you have to do more and more of it. So it's quite a terrible disease. But, and this is related to the part of transplantation that I'll be talking about, you can also get transplants from a live donor, right? Each of you has 2 kidneys, and if you're as healthy as you look, you can remain healthy with just 1 kidney. Say again? 27,000 were removed from the list. I don't have all 27,000 on the slide. No. 34,000 were added to the list, and only 27,000 were removed. Now, how were they removed? So 10,000 got transplants from dead people. Sure. I'm looking at, I mean, it's different people. You tend to remove from early, So you can die, but you can also get transplants from a live person. And notice, just incidentally, that in the US we still have more transplants from dead people, but we have more living donors than dead donors, right? Because dead donors give both their kidneys, living donors just give one, right? So the modal donor in the United States is a living donor. And you can give someone you love a kidney. If you're healthy enough to give a kidney, you might not be. You have to not have high blood pressure, not have protein in your urine, not have diabetes, not be morbidly obese. But you could be healthy enough to give a kidney and still not able to give it to the person you love, and that's what promotes exchange. And so the simplest type of exchange is, look at donor 1 and recipient 1. They have different blood types that, in a way, that prevents recipient 1 from receiving the kidney of donor 1. But there can be another pair of donors and recipients who are just the reverse. So the A blood type donor could give to the A recipient, and the B donor could give to the B recipient in an exchange. So this is a classic economic problem. When Jevons wrote about barter in 1800, he actually wasn't writing about barter, he was writing about money. He viewed money as a market design invention to get around the inefficiencies of barter. And he characterized the inefficiencies of barter as requiring this double coincidence of wants. Before you can exchange with barter, you have to find someone who has what you want and who wants what you have. And that's the case in this kind of exchange. But as Jevons pointed out, there's not going to be a high volume of exchange if you have to look around for that double coincidence. So Jevons suggested that this is why we invented money. It's because there's a medium of exchange that allows you to buy what you need and sell what you have, not necessarily to the same person. So a good discussion to have is, why don't we have buying and selling of kidneys? But the short answer, the proximate answer is it's against the law. It's against the law in the United States because of the National Organ Transplant Act, which says it's unlawful for any person to acquire, receive, or otherwise transfer any human organ for valuable consideration for use in human transplantation. So the phrase valuable consideration was a problem as well, because you might look at this and say there's valuable consideration going on in that exchange. And indeed, after we had already started establishing the New England Program for Kidney Exchange and the Alliance for Paired Donation, the Department of Justice declined to say that kidney exchange was legal under the code. And one of the surgeons who I work closely with said that one of his former patients was a U.S. attorney in Ohio, and maybe he should prompt himself to be prosecuted so that the courts could decide. And all his friends and colleagues said, no, don't do that. There's no telling what the courts will decide. But eventually, after a number of years, Congress amended this act, which literally amends it by looking at this sentence and saying the preceding sentence does not apply with respect to human organ paired donation, which is the polite word for kidney exchange. They don't like the word exchange. One example of irrationality is this act had no opposition at all. But I'm sure that this will resonate with Eddie. It's hard to get the Congress to do anything. 3 Congresses, this act was introduced in 3 consecutive Congresses, and in 2 it just failed, not because it ever came to a vote, but because it never did, right? Congress is busy. Then Charlie Norwood, the representative from Georgia who sponsored it, died of a transplant-related disease. Once you've had a transplant, you spend the rest of your life taking immunosuppressive drugs so you don't reject the organ. And he succumbed to an immunosuppressive disease. And his colleagues named the bill after him and passed it unanimously with no dissent. So this wasn't a controversial bit of legislation, but it took 3 years to get it passed, which opened the door for a national exchange, which I'll tell you about a little bit, that's having some troubles compared to the regional exchanges, which are thriving. So let me tell you a little bit about kidney exchange. So I'm the man in the yellow gown there, keeping my hands out of the way so that no one hands me anything. And what I don't want to be handed is in that bucket in the left position. There's a kidney. Behind me, not in this other picture, but behind me out of the picture is another operating room where a nephrectomy has just gone on. A kidney has just been removed. It's in that bucket and it's going into this man. These things are taking place in Cincinnati, Ohio. And at the same time, literally at the same time. They get on their cell phones and coordinate after they've anesthetized the patients and they've made the initial incisions, but they haven't taken the kidney yet. At the same time, the same thing is going on in Toledo, Ohio. And that's where that's where his donor and her patient are at the same time. The reason they do it at the same time is you can't give valuable consideration. There's no contract that can be written that says kidneys will be exchanged. Okay, so the way they make sure that it goes through is by, and that no one backs out, is by doing it at the same time. But that's a big logistical cost, because it means to do just that simplest kind of kidney exchange with two incompatible patient-donor pairs, you need 4 simultaneous surgeries. That means 4 operating rooms and 4 surgical teams. So it's a big deal. They have to be coordinated. Okay, if you wanted to do an exchange with 3 pairs, you'd need 6 simultaneous operating rooms and surgical teams. Okay, so lots of colleagues on this. My economist colleagues were Tayfun Sunmez and Utku Unver, and lately Itai Ashlagi. I'm going to tell you about the work with Itai before I'm done. But also, what I want to point out to you is this kind of work goes on not just in economics journals, but in medical journals as well. And if you have to, there's a certain sense in which we use science to do politics. To get things implemented, you have to cause them to be standard medical practice. My medical colleagues here are Frank Delmonico and Mike Reese. I'll tell you more about Mike Reese. And there's a growing CS, computer science literature too. So this is work very much in the spirit of the Center of Rationality. It's a very interdisciplinary kind of work that comes together on a specific class of problems. And there have been institutions built, and I'll tell you a little about those. The Alliance for Paired Donation and the New England Program for Kidney Exchange are the ones that I was initially involved in. Now we're trying, with some difficulties that I'll tell you about, to get a national exchange going now that it's acknowledged to be legal. So let me tell you about the problem of getting kidney exchange going. So first you have to make the market thick. And what that meant was getting appropriate databases. And then you have to be able to coordinate hospital logistics so you can do simultaneous surgeries. The New England Program for Kidney Exchange started with the 14 transplant centers in New England. So it started with 14 hospitals. Well, 14 hospitals do their elective kidney surgeries on 5 different days. And so it took us a year before we could arrange that kidney surgeries done at 2 different hospitals in New England. These can be blocks from each other, the Massachusetts General Hospital and the Beth Israel Deaconess. Getting them to be able to do surgeries like the ones I showed you in the picture at the same time on the same day took a year to arrange, along with getting the consent slips signed so that we could use the blood test information that people had generated to see whether they could give a kidney to their partner. We needed separate permissions to see whether we could, to allow us to access that data so that we could use it to look for kidney exchange. So as economists, we often talk about frictions in markets. Some of these frictions are very real. They're simple to think about, but take time to resolve. Now, the first pass we made on this, before we started talking to doctors as it happens, goes back to some theory that many of you will know. In volume 1, number 1 of the Journal of Mathematical Economics, Shapley and Scarf wrote a paper in 1974 that looked at a model in which agents each were endowed with 1 unit of an indivisible good, and they could trade them and they couldn't use money. Now, Shapley and Scarf didn't have any particular market in mind. I mean, hopefully now you are thinking kidneys. But they called them houses. They didn't explain why they couldn't use money. It was just a good theoretical exercise in how would we do exchange if we didn't have money and had a lot of good data on people's preferences. And the algorithm that they proposed, which is one that we'll be using in school choice in New Orleans next year, suitably modified, is they said, here's how you do it. Think of each agent now as a pair of a patient and a donor who are incompatible. The patient can't take the the algorithm they proposed, which they attributed to David Gale, called top trading cycles, they say, have everyone point to the object they like best. That will cause a cycle to form in the resulting graph, because someone eventually has to point to an object that's been pointed to before, even if it's someone pointing to his own object. They say, okay, well, give everyone what he's pointing to and have them leave the market. And then do it again. So it's a little bit like the Boston algorithm. If you're in the chosen group, you get what you asked for. But it's a different problem, and it has the property, you can quickly verify, that the allocation that you get is in the core of the game. You can't find a group of people who would all prefer a different allocation, because the people who leave in the first cycle, they all got their very favorite thing. They were pointing to their favorite thing. You can't make them better off. The people in the second cycle, they get their favorite thing of all those that remain. So you can't make them better off without giving them a kidney that left in the first cycle, and none of those people will be better off if you do that. So it's an outcome that's in the core. When preferences are strict, it's a unique outcome. And for my purposes today, this is a theorem that I actually proved in 1982, long before we thought of kidneys as what was going on. This is a procedure that makes it a dominant strategy for everyone to tell you their true preferences. So think of this as something where you're going to say, give us the medical information we need, the blood test information and other things that we need in order to figure out which are good kidneys for you. Will it be a dominant strategy for you to give us the correct information, to indicate that all the kidneys that you could take, and so forth. And it turns out it is a dominant strategy. And let me give you an idea of how it works, just to give an idea of who we're thinking of as the players here. Right? So we didn't have any kidney exchange in the United States at this point. We were trying to get people to enroll in kidney exchange and reveal the necessary information. The question is, who are those people? The answer is they are basically patients and surgeons, right? So it's surgeons in consultation with their patients are going to say, they're doing this new thing at the New England Organ Bank, let's do it. And now the question is, what kind of information will they give us? Let's look at Mr. I here. The reason I've picked him is you can see that he's not going to get what he's pointing to. We've asked everyone to point to their first choice, and he's pointing to a cycle that doesn't include him. So when we give everyone in the cycles what they pointed to, that cycle he's pointing to is going to disappear. And so the question is, why doesn't he come to harm by that? Maybe he shouldn't tell us his first choice, given that his first choice is going to disappear and he's not going to get it. Well, the reason he doesn't come to harm is when you look at the choices he could get now, his current opportunity set, he could get this guy by pointing to him, he could get this guy by pointing to him, but those guys aren't going anyplace. When the cycle goes away, they'll still be here because we've asked them for a list of preferences just as we've asked him, and they're going to keep pointing in his direction until he goes away. So now his opportunity set will grow. Everyone who's pointing at someone who went away has to point someplace new, and maybe some of those people will point to player I or to someone who's pointing to player I. So what makes it safe, what makes it safe for player I to tell us his true preferences is, even though he may not get what he's pointing to, all the things he could have gotten will remain available for him in the future. But as you can see from the picture, this gives us a picture of cycles and chains, and some of the cycles could be big. Here I've done some three-way cycles, which if we wanted to implement them would take 6 simultaneous operating rooms. There could be a 10-way cycle that would take 20 simultaneous operating rooms. So when we started talking to our medical colleagues, they said to us, forget it. They said cycles and chains might get too long. And if you really want to help us, all we're ever going to do is pairwise exchanges. Why don't you help us organize pairwise exchanges? Take as given a constraint that when we do a kidney exchange, they will be only 4 simultaneous operations, 2 nephrectomies and 2 transplants. So that's a big constraint. You hate to have to live with it, but if you've got to live with it, you go ahead. And that allows you, again, to look at a model where you can tap into some elegant existing theory and get dominant strategy mechanisms. And the graph theory that underlies this has nothing to do with kidneys. It's called I'm showing you a picture of something called the Goliath decomposition theorem. This is a theorem about graphs that says if you can only do pairwise exchanges and you want to match as many people as possible, how will the graph look? And what it says, you know, there are going to be some people who are over-demanded and some people who are under-demanded. And under-demanded people are going to be people who could be matched at some maximal exchange but might not be. And over-demanded people are going to be their neighbors who are matched at every maximal exchange, but who they're matched to determines which of the under-demanded people get matched. So this has nothing to do with kidney exchange, but what I want to show you next is who these people are. And for that, I'll have to tell you a little about blood types and things like that, because we can populate this graph, and by populating it, we can learn a lot more about what are the efficient exchanges that are possible, because every patient-donor pair is going to have a bunch of medical information, the first order part of which is going to be two blood types, the blood type of the patient and the blood type of the donor. So let me tell you about blood types and other things that determine who can exchange kidneys with whom, who can give a kidney to whom. Okay, so there are two proteins that play a role in blood type, and the proteins are called A and B, and so the four blood types depend on which of these you have. They're called A if you have only the A protein, B if you have only the B protein, AB if you have both, and in English we say O if you have none of them, but in many languages that is 0, which is more transparent to understand. It just means you don't have any of the blood proteins. And the rule is the simple rule. It can be gotten around by heroic means, but the simple rule is you can't take a kidney, you can't receive a kidney from someone who has a blood protein that you do not have. Okay, so if you're an O patient, you can only receive an O kidney. If you're an AB patient, you can receive any kidney in terms of blood type, but if you're an AB donor, you can only give a kidney to an AB patient. Okay, so O donors are going to be very desirable donors, but O patients are going to be vulnerable. They can only take O kidneys. And there's an additional reason that O donors will be in short supply, and not just that the demand for their kidneys is high. For various reasons, and some of these we would dearly like to overcome but haven't yet, for various reasons, if you come to an American hospital with and you need a kidney, and you have a donor who can give you a kidney, and your donor is compatible, in almost all of the transplant centers I know, they will not tell you about kidney exchange. They'll say, let's schedule a surgery, right? Your spouse wants to give you a kidney, you're compatible, let's do it. How about next Tuesday? And as a result, the only O donors we're going to see are O donors who are incompatible with their intended recipients. But they're never going to be incompatible because of blood type. So they have to be incompatible for some other reasons, and that has to do with immunological incompatibility. There's a vector, for the purposes of immunological incompatibility, a donor is a 6 vector of proteins called human leukocyte antigens. And that's a vector of 6 proteins, each locus of which can have many proteins in it. But you have 6 of them, 3 from your mom and 3 from your dad. And I can't take your kidney if I have an antibody already existing to one of your proteins, because then my immune system will attack your kidney and reject it. So the chance that one of you, if I didn't know my blood type, the unconditional chance that you could take one of my kidneys is over 50%. But the unconditional chance that my wife can take one of my kidneys is only about 30%. And that's because my wife and I are parents. And in the course of childbirth, she might have been exposed to each of our children has 6 proteins, 3 of which come from me, and if in childbirth, not pregnancy, but after the placenta has broken, if my wife is exposed to some of those proteins in a way that causes her immune system to develop an antibody, then she's likely to be sensitized against my kidney. She could have an antibody that would attack my kidney if it were to show up. So a very common form of incompatibility is that I want to give a kidney to my wife, but I can't because we're parents. Now, in that case, she wouldn't be highly sensitized. She could very likely take one of your kidneys. It would be very idiosyncratic that she was sensitized against my kidney. But if she had had a previous kidney transplant, or if she'd had lots of blood transfusions, or any of a number of other things that can happen to people when they're ill, then she might be highly sensitized. She might have lots of antibodies and be very hard to match, and I'll talk about that. But when we look at the distribution in the United States of blood types, what we see is that O blood types are not in short supply. That's the modal blood type of Americans. But in kidney exchange, we're going to see that we actually have quite few, relatively few O donors, because they're selected against by the fact that we only talk to incompatible pairs about kidney exchange. Now, these bottom things, PRA, percentage reactive antibodies, that's the sensitivity. So most patients, these are the statistics of patients of those 90,000 patients who are waiting for deceased organ donors. So they are representative of patients and, in many ways, of Americans. These are not the population in kidney exchange. But what's at the bottom is 70% have what's called low PRA. They have not too many antibodies. They can, for them, what determines whether they can take your kidney or not is blood type. But 10%, 9.8%, have high PRA. They have lots of antibodies. What determines whether they can take your kidney is not just whether your blood type is compatible, it must be, but also whether, by chance, if they have 90% PRA, it means that of the blood type compatible kidneys, they can only take 10% of them. If they have 99% PRA, it means they can only take 1% of them. And one of the things I'm going to tell you about is, as hospitals have become players, they've started to do internal kidney exchanges. As they've learned about kidney exchange, they don't always show them to the clearinghouses. They sometimes do their own. And what that means is they're doing the easy-to-match patients themselves and only showing the exchanges, the hard-to-match patients. And you're going to see that we have lots of high PRA patients, many more than 10%. And that's because those are the hard-to-match patients. Okay? And that's going to change the way kidney exchange can be done. Okay? So now I can go back to this graph that had nothing to do with kidneys, just to do with graphs, and I can populate it. Who are over-demanded and who are under-demanded? Well, the over-demanded people are going to be the ones who have kidneys that are valuable and are in short supply. So the over-demanded people, the short side of the market, is going to be the A patients with the O donors, say. There are lots of A patients with O donors. There are very few O donors with A patients because most O donors are compatible with their A patients. And they just go ahead and we never see them. But the O donors who show up are in short supply. The long side of the market, the under-demanded pairs, are the O patients with the A donors. Right? We have a lot of O patients and not many O kidneys and O donors. So at the end of every efficient match, there are going to be O patients left over. There'll be O patients who are not matched. Now, Itai Ashlagi and I have been trying to understand two things. One is, how would things look if all the hospitals showed us all their patients and kidney exchange went national, if it became very large? So that's sort of an idealized world. And the second thing we're trying to understand is, since they don't show us all their patients, how can we explain, or how do we explain how kidney exchange actually looks as it's now developing? So I'm going to show you the idealized model first. And in the idealized model, we're going to look at a random graph. The nodes are the patient-donor pairs, and there's an edge from one node to another if the donor in the first pair can give to the patient in the second pair. And the Erdős-Rényi theorem says if the market grows large enough and if the probability of connections doesn't get too small as a function of n, then eventually we'll have perfect matching. We'll be able to match as many as possible given the blood type constraints and things like that. And it turns out that when you can do that, in that perfect world, you couldn't make do with exchanges just of size 2, but exchanges of size 3 would be enough, and they would look like this. The over-demanded guys are in blue, all the O patients and things like that. And the under-demanded guys, I'm sorry, the O donors are over-demanded, they're on top, and the O patients and other under-demanded are on the bottom. That is, there'll be people left over on the bottom, but we're going to completely exhaust everyone who's colored in blue. And there'd be some sets of three-way exchanges and lots of two-way exchanges. And you'd never need more than a three-way exchange. And the reason, to get the maximal exchange, and the reason is, you say, how about a four-way exchange like this one? Here's an AB patient with an O donor. Okay, so this is a really valuable resource. They've got a great donor, and the patient can take anybody's kidney. So I could create the reverse, an OAB, out of 3 hard-to-match patients, right? Here's a O patient with an A donor. The A donor gives to the A patient. The B donor gives to the B patient. And the AB donor, who can't give to anyone but an AB patient, gives to the AB patient. That looks pretty efficient, right? That's a real good use of that AB-O pair. But we could have, instead of doing that one 4-way, we could have done 2 3-ways with people who will be otherwise exhausted. So that's why 3-way is in this perfect world, we wouldn't do more than 3 ways. Okay, because instead of getting that 4-way exchange with 4 transplants, we'd get 2 3-ways and get 6 transplants. And the issue is always, how many of the guys in the uncolored set can we get transplanted? Because there's always going to be guys of that sort left over.
Alan, what does that mean? Almost. What does the word almost mean? Almost or not?
Okay, so this is it's a random graph. So it's with probability converging to 1 as n goes to infinity. So the almost, right, what I've got is I've got the Erdos-Renyi, in almost every large graph. So it's one of these, except on a small set. I mean, and it converges as n goes to infinity. Infinity is a big number in these cases. So, in the United States, we have 90,000 patients. Not all of them have donors. In our exchanges that we've got going at any given time, we've never had more than 500 pairs. And nationally, if you aggregated them all, we're talking a small number of thousand. So we have to think about convergence rates. We run a lot of simulations, and convergence, practical convergence is pretty quick, but let me tell you about what's going on. As kidney exchange has grown, as we have more and more transplant centers participating in it, the big ones are starting to withhold, as I said, their internal matches. And it's sensible for them to do so. So let me explain why, and that the consequences in principle could be very bad. So here's a theorem that Itai and I proved that says, what's the biggest exchange that you can run? So when we started the New England program for kidney exchange, they said only 2-way exchanges, 4 operating rooms. We wrote a paper before before the theorem that I showed you. Typhoon and Utku and I wrote a paper that came out in the AR in 2007, and let me tell you something about publishing. So we wrote a theoretical paper that said you would never have to do more than 4-way exchanges, and that came out in the AR in 2007. We convinced our surgical colleagues, and we did that they should at least get up to 3-way exchanges, and they did. And we wrote a follow-up paper that reported how we were doing the surgeries, and that came out in the American Journal of Transplantation in 2006, a year before the original paper. So, so medicine, there's a lot of frustration in publishing in medicine, but they do have a sense of urgency about publication that is absent from economics. And it's not the first time that a follow-up paper that involved a lot of following up, like doing surgeries, has appeared, the year before the economics paper appears. But anyway, tells you something about rationality and irrationality in academia. I am really slow. Okay, let me, I apologize. Let me try to finish very quickly. Right now, the current system makes it sensible for hospitals to withhold some of their pairs. I won't show you that. In principle, there's a fix for that. We could guarantee hospitals that they could do as many transplants through the exchange as they will do on their own. But we don't do that now. As a policy, we haven't implemented that, but we could do it in a way that would not be costly in a large market. Okay, so there's something we could do but have not had the political ability to do yet. But, and when we run simulations, the convergence is fine on the numbers we have. But that isn't what's happening. In order to tell you what's happening, I have to tell you, take 5 minutes to tell you about another kind of surgery, another kind of exchange that goes on, which is that we sometimes have non-directed donors. And a non-directed donor is a donor who wants to donate a kidney and does not have a particular patient in mind. And what we used to do before we had a pool of kidney exchange candidates is we used to say to a non-directed donor, you can give a kidney to someone who's been on the waiting list, to a patient on the waiting list. And now we say instead, you can give a kidney to a pair that's waiting for an exchange, and the donor 1 will give a kidney to patient 2, and donor 2 will give to someone on the waiting list. So we can get more exchanges out of it. And in a less abstract picture, it looks like this. And the question is, why are there only 6 people in that picture? And the answer is what I already told you. In New England, we convinced our colleagues to go from 4 simultaneous operating rooms to 6 simultaneous operating rooms, and there they are. There are the 6 people, the 3 nephrectomies and the 3 transplants. But now you can ask, maybe we don't have to do these simultaneously. Maybe now some of the irrationality is going to come in. Maybe we can afford to do these non-simultaneously. And let's revisit why we do them simultaneously. And this is a question that my colleagues and I raised in a surgical journal. Let me remind you why we do things simultaneously. Okay? So let's look at a conventional two-way matching. And supposing we didn't do it simultaneously. And on day 1, donor 2 gives to recipient 1. And on the next day, donor 1 is supposed to give to recipient 2. And the first part goes through, donor 2 gives to recipient 1, so donor 2 doesn't have a kidney anymore. And then on the next day, for whatever reason, the link breaks. Donor 1 fails to give to recipient 2 for an incentive reason or for a medical reason. Well, donor 2 and recipient 2 are really harmed by this. Not only have they given a kidney and not gotten one, they don't have a kidney anymore. Next month, when we run another kidney exchange, they can't participate. They've lost their kidney. So they're really harmed. So we never do those non-simultaneously. That's why they get on the phone and they say, our patients are anesthetized and ready to go. How about your patients? And they do them simultaneously. But now let's suppose we have a live non-directed donor, a living non-directed donor, and we try to do it non-simultaneously. And on day 1, recipient 1 gets a kidney, just as before. And on day 2, for whatever reason happened before, the same thing happens, and donor 1 fails to give a kidney to recipient 2. Well, recipient 2 is very disappointed, but donor 2 and recipient 2 are not irreparably harmed. They haven't given a kidney yet. They are no worse off than before the non-directed donor appears. And next month, when we run a kidney exchange, they can run again. So the cost of having this non-simultaneous chain is less than when it's an exchange. So the implementation of that was reported by Mike Reese. He's the first author here. He's a great surgeon in Toledo, Ohio. It was reported in the New England Journal of Medicine. And that very first chain that we organized had 10 transplants, 20 people, right? This would have taken 20 simultaneous operating rooms. But it didn't, because some of them were done in July, and some were done in September, and some were done in February, and some were done in March, ending with that last AB donor who in March 2008, which is as far as it had gone when the New England Journal came out, hadn't been matched. And you can see why she hadn't been matched. She's an AB donor. She has to give to an AB patient. And not only are AB patients rare in the population generally, they're only 4% of Americans, but if we only allow in compatible pairs, they're mostly compatible with their donors, so they're really rare. We try not to end chains with AB patients anymore, but this was the first one, and this is what it looked like in People magazine. So you get 10 transplants here instead of being able to only do 6. 3 transplants, 6 operating rooms. Okay, this is 20 operating rooms, 10 transplants. And subsequently, there have been longer ones. Here's a 32-person chain with 16 transplants. And so the question is, what's going on? Why are these chains working so effectively? And in a really large market, they wouldn't be, because remember that picture I showed you? We've already used up all the O donors, so the new non-directed donor, he could be an O, but we couldn't get very far because we'd run out of O donors. The longest chain we could get in this picture, after we've used up all the guys in blue, is the O donor could give to an O patient with an A donor who could give to an A patient with an AB donor, and there we'd be with that AB donor, and we've used up all the AB patients. They could give to someone on the deceased donor waiting list. That's how we used to end these. But that's not what we're finding. And the reason we're not finding it is, instead of having those just 10% people who are high PRA, in the different exchanges we organize, They are 51, 65, 80, and 71%. We're seeing lots and lots of highly sensitized patients. So up to now, I've really been telling you about these compatibility graphs as if it were only the blood types. But it turns out the guys we're seeing, it's all about the immunological reactions. And the reason is, you can look for other explanations, but the reason is the hospitals are withholding the easy-to-match pairs. If you aren't very highly sensitized and you go to a big transplant center, they now know how to do kidney exchange. They can do it in-house. This is costly, right? It means less efficient. Let fewer transplants get done nationally. But it's not irrational on their part, because under the current systems, they are not guaranteed of getting those transplants if they show them up. Here's why is this going on? Well, this is what a real compatibility graph looks like. These are just patients and donors with the same blood type A. And I'm now, the guys with, I'm not going to turn it upside down. This is a mixture of high sensitized and low sensitized patients. And what it looks like is a medusa, right? A jellyfish. At the top, there's this group of low sensitized patients who are connected. They look like the Erdős-Rényi graph. And then hanging down are all these chains waiting for a non-directed donor to get plugged in. And so that's the current state of kidney exchange. We're getting lots of our transplants from we don't have that many non-directed donors, but they cause lots of transplants. And the reason this is happening is because hospitals are acting very rationally, and unfortunately, with the system we've got, it's rational for them to withhold patients. But the reason we can do chains is because these donors are not the standard rational economic players. They give a kidney even after their patient has gotten one. And they have non-standard, the motivation they have is not standard in economic models. They're the non-directed donors themselves. Maybe they're even a little standard nowadays. They're altruists. But how about the people who were planning to give a kidney to their wife, and their wife or their mom or whoever got a kidney last week, and now they show up as scheduled to give a kidney this week? They could be just honorable people. A deal's a deal. They could also have more complex non-rational motivations. That is, if you're planning to give a kidney to your spouse, that's a very clear sign that you love her. It would be less clear if after she got a kidney, you reneged on your commitment to give a kidney, the following week. Now at family gatherings, the story would be harder to tell, my husband loved me, he promised to give me a kidney, I got a kidney, and then, So in fact, we can rely on these guys. We are depending on them. We are doing non-simultaneous chains, and we are seeing both the bad effects of high rational hospitals, the bad effects of the slow implementation in the political process, that we can't fix the algorithm, although we know how, and the good effects that donors are not narrowly selfish. They are honorable people. So let me end there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm afraid we'll have to skip the questions. Al Roth will be here for another 2 days, and you are welcome to catch him for questions. We're going to take 15 minutes break, or let's do it 10 minutes, and we go to the Alata house to continue with the